The family had purchased Plot 147 in advance, but by the time they arrived for the service, it had already been reassigned. I know this because I was the one who processed the reassignment. I was also the one who found the original deed of sale, dated 3 days after the family claims they bought it. And I was the one standing in the records office at Hollywood Forever Cemetery at 11:40 on a Tuesday night when I pulled the file drawer open and found my own name on the transfer form. A form I had never signed for a plot I had never heard of, dated 6 weeks before I was hired. My name is Daniel Brewer. For 9 months, I worked as a records compliance contractor for a private firm that handles administrative overflow for several historic cemeteries in the greater Los Angeles area. It's not the kind of job most people know exists. When a cemetery has been in operation for over 100 years, when it's gone through multiple ownership changes, natural disasters, legal disputes, and decades of inconsistent record keeping, you end up with files that contradict each other, deed books that don't match computer entries, plot maps that show empty lots where there are headstones, or headstones where the map says there's a utility path. My job was to reconcile those records. I'd compare the physical survey data with the original deed books, cross-reference interment logs, flag discrepancies, and submit correction requests to the cemetery's internal legal team. It's tedious work. It's the kind of thing you do in a windowless office with fluorescent lights that buzz at a frequency just low enough to give you a headache by 4 in the afternoon. But it pays reasonably well, and the hours were flexible. Most weeks I worked 9 to 5. Some weeks, when a family dispute or a legal inquiry required urgent file retrieval, I'd come in during off hours to access the vault where the oldest records were stored, a climate-controlled room in the basement of the cemetery's administrative building, accessible only with a badge and a code that changed monthly. Hollywood Forever is not what most people picture when they think of a cemetery. It sits on Santa Monica Boulevard in the middle of Hollywood. There are film screenings on the lawn in summer. Tourists photograph the graves of famous actors. The grounds are beautiful, maintained like a park. During the day, it doesn't feel eerie. It feels like Los Angeles, bright, performative, layered with histories that nobody stops to read. At night, it's different. Not in any supernatural way, or at least, I didn't think so at first. It's just quiet in a way that the rest of Hollywood never is. The walls keep the traffic noise out. The office building is old, built in the 1930s, renovated twice since then, but still carrying that feeling of plaster and wood underneath the drywall. The basement hallway is narrow. The vault room smells like paper and something faintly chemical, preservative, probably, from the binding glue on the old ledgers. The dispute that started everything came in on a Thursday. A family, I'll call them the Garcias, had purchased plot 1147 in the Cathedral Mausoleum section 2 years prior. They had a receipt. They had a signed deed of sale. Their attorney had a copy of the purchase agreement on file. They'd planned a burial for the following Monday. Their grandfather had passed after a long illness, and they wanted to honor the arrangement he'd made before his diagnosis. When the funeral director called on Friday to confirm logistics, the cemetery's scheduling system showed plot 1147 as occupied. Not reserved. Occupied. According to the database, an interment had taken place there 3 weeks earlier. A different name, a different family, a different funeral home had handled the service. This happens more often than you'd think. Double bookings, data entry errors, system migration glitches. When a cemetery digitizes 100 years of paper records, things get lost in translation. My firm was brought in specifically to prevent disputes like this from reaching litigation. So when the Garcia family's attorney called on Friday afternoon, My supervisor forwarded the case to me. Standard procedure: pull the physical file, compare it to the database entry, identify the discrepancy, recommend a resolution. I drove out that same Friday evening. The administrative office closes at 5, but my badge gets me into the building until midnight. The sooner I could identify the error, the sooner legal could offer the family options before Monday's service. The file room is on the second floor. That's where active records live. I found the folder for plot 1147 easily enough. Inside was a single deed of sale, signed and notarized, showing the plot had been purchased by the Garcia family on March 14, 2024. The price was listed, the plot location was specified, the signatures were in order. Everything matched what the family's attorney had provided. I logged into the database terminal at the desk outside the file room. Plot 1147 showed an interment date of October 2nd, 2024. The name of the deceased was listed as Robert Alan Marsh. Funeral home, Green Lawn Memorial Services. Family contact, none listed. Payment, prepaid, cash equivalent, no invoice attached. The first discrepancy was small. The interment log, the daily record of all burials performed, showed no entry for October 2nd. The grounds crew log for that day showed routine maintenance and one interment in a completely different section. No crew member had been assigned to the cathedral mausoleum that day. The database said someone was buried there. The physical log said no one was. I wrote it up as a data entry error, probably a test entry that never got deleted, or a migration artifact from the last software update. I flagged it for the IT team and for legal, noting that the physical deed supported the Garcia family's claim. I recommended the plot be confirmed as theirs and the interment record be investigated and likely deleted. I sent the email at 7:40 that evening. Then I drove home, ate dinner, and didn't think about it again until Monday morning, when my supervisor called me at 6:15. The Monday burial had been stopped, not by the cemetery, by the police. When the grounds crew arrived at 7 to prepare the site for the Garcia family's 10 o'clock service, they found plot 1147 had been disturbed. The marble facing on the mausoleum niche had been removed and replaced with a temporary seal, the kind used during the curing period after a new interment. Someone had placed a casket in the niche. There was a body in it. The police cordoned off the section. The Garcia family was notified that the service would need to be postponed. A detective from the LAPD's Hollywood division came out. The medical examiner's office was called. My supervisor told me to pull everything I had on the plot, every document, every log entry, every database record, and prepare it for possible subpoena. I drove back out to the cemetery that morning. By the time I arrived, the detective had already left, but a uniformed officer was still posted at the entrance to the cathedral mausoleum section. I showed my badge and my contractor ID, explained that I was there for records, and was waved through to the administrative building without issue. That's when the second discrepancy appeared. The file I'd pulled on Friday, the one with the Garcia family's deed of sale, was gone. The folder for plot 1147 was still in the drawer, but inside it was a different deed. This one was dated March 17th, 2024, 3 days after the Garcia purchase. It showed the plot sold to a Robert Alan Marsh, prepaid in full, cash equivalent, no attorney listed. The signature was notarized, the cemetery stamp was present, and the deed number was sequential. It fit perfectly into the numbering system between the files on either side of it. The Garcia deed was nowhere in the folder. I checked the adjacent files. I checked the outbox on the filing desk in case someone had pulled it for legal. I checked my email. My Friday report was still there, referencing the Garcia deed and its details. But the physical document was gone, and in its place was a deed I had never seen before. I called my supervisor. She told me not to touch anything else and to photograph what was in the file. I did. Then I sat at the terminal and pulled up the database again. Plot 1147 now showed 2 entries. The first was the Garcia purchase, intact, unchanged, dated March 14th. The second was the October 2nd interment of Robert Alan Marsh, also unchanged. But there was now a third line I hadn't seen on Friday. A transfer notation, dated September 28th, 4 days before the listed interment. It read, "Plot reassigned per administrative review. Original purchaser notified. See file." The notation was stamped with an employee code. The employee code was mine. I stared at it for a long time. My code is a 6-digit alphanumeric string assigned when my firm processes a new contractor through the cemetery system. It's unique to me. I hadn't made that entry. I hadn't processed a reassignment. I hadn't notified anyone. But the system showed my code, my date stamp, and my access credentials as the author of the transfer. The rational part of my brain kicked in immediately. Someone had used my login. It happens. Shared terminals, shoulder-surfed passwords, maybe even a system error that assigned the wrong code. I changed my password, documented the anomaly, and included it in my updated report. I noted clearly that I had not made the entry and that my login credentials may have been compromised. My supervisor acknowledged the report and told me the police would likely want to interview me, given that my code was in the system. She said it casually, routine stuff, nothing to worry about, just be available. The detective called me Tuesday afternoon. His name was Orozco. He was professional, not unfriendly, but direct. He asked me when I'd last accessed the file for plot 1147. I told him Friday evening. He asked if I'd made any changes to the database. I said no. I'd only read the entries and sent a report. He asked if anyone else had access to my login credentials. I said not to my knowledge. He asked if I knew Robert Alan Marsh. I said I'd never heard the name before Friday. Then he asked something that caught me off guard. He asked if I'd ever accessed the system between midnight and 5 in the morning. I said no. My badge only works until midnight, and I'd never had reason to come in that late. He paused, then said, "Your badge log shows 3 entries between 2 and 4 a.m. in the last 6 weeks." He read me the dates. October 1st, October 14th, October 29th. October 1st was the night before the listed interment of Robert Alan Marsh. I told him that was impossible. I told him I'd been home on all 3 of those nights. He said he wasn't accusing me of anything, just trying to reconcile the records. He thanked me for my time and said he might follow up. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and tried to think through it logically. Badge cloning was possible. The cards used a standard proximity chip. Someone could have duplicated it. But they'd also need the door code, which changed monthly, and my database login, and knowledge of where the files were stored and how the system worked. I pulled up my email sent folder and scrolled back through 6 weeks of reports. I wanted to see what I'd filed on those dates, October 1st, 14th, and 29th. On October 1st, I'd sent my supervisor a routine batch of discrepancy reports, nothing related to plot 1147. On October 14th, I'd sent a follow-up on a different case, a boundary dispute in the Garden of Legends section. On October 29th, I'd sent nothing. I checked my calendar. October 29th was a day I'd taken off. A dental appointment in the morning, then errands. But when I opened my work log, the time-tracking spreadsheet I update manually from my firm's billing, October 29th showed 4 hours logged. Site visit, records vault, file reconciliation. I hadn't written that entry. The cell was formatted slightly differently than my usual entries. The font was the same, but the timestamp format used a period instead of a colon between hours and minutes. A detail so small I might never have noticed it if I hadn't been looking. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, not yet, because I was angry. Someone was using my credentials, my access, my identity within the system to do something I didn't understand. And now, a police detective had my name associated with unauthorized after-hours access to a cemetery where a body had appeared in someone else's plot. Wednesday morning, I drove back to the cemetery and requested a meeting with the facilities manager, a man named Hector, who'd been with Hollywood Forever for over 20 years. I told him I believed my badge had been cloned and asked if the security system kept camera footage of the after-hours badge entries. He said the cameras at the administrative building entrance had been replaced last year, but the new system had a gap. Between midnight and 6 a.m., the cameras switched to a motion-activated mode that only recorded when triggered, and the sensitivity had been set too low. Several nighttime badge-ins had occurred without corresponding footage. He said IET was aware of the issue, but hadn't prioritized a fix because nobody comes in that late anyway. I asked him about October 1st. Did anyone remember anything unusual that morning? Grounds crew finding anything out of place? Doors unlocked that should have been locked? Files out of order? He thought about it, then said something that stayed with me. You know, there was one thing. Around that time, early October, I think, one of the night security guys mentioned that the vault room light was on when he did his 2 a.m. walkthrough. He turned it off. Didn't think much of it. People forget to flip switches. I asked if security had checked whether anyone was in the building. Hector shook his head. The building was locked. Badge entry only. If someone was in there, they had a badge. And if they had a badge, they were supposed to be there. That's the whole point of the system. The whole point of the system. That phrase looped in my head as I drove home. The system was designed so that anyone inside it was legitimate by definition. If your badge gets you in, you belong. If your code is on a record, you authored it. If your login made a change, you made the change. The system doesn't ask who you are. It only asks what credentials you're carrying. Thursday, I received an email from the cemetery's legal team. It was addressed to my supervisor, with me CC'd. The subject line was Plot 1147, Resolution. The body of the email stated that following consultation with law enforcement and internal review, Plot 1147 would be reassigned. The Garcia family would be offered an alternative plot of equal or greater value at no additional cost. The existing interment would remain in place pending the completion of the police investigation. The file would be updated to reflect the new assignment. At the bottom of the email was a note. Transfer documentation has been completed by D. Brewer per standard procedure. No further action required from contractor team. I had not completed any transfer documentation. I picked up the phone and called my supervisor immediately. She answered on the second ring. I told her I hadn't processed the transfer. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Daniel, your code is on the form. I'm looking at it right now. Timestamped this morning at 8:15. I told her I hadn't been logged into the system that morning. I'd been in my car, driving, with no laptop open. She said she believed me, but that the documentation was clean. properly formatted, properly coded, properly filed. She said legal had already accepted it. She said the best thing I could do was document my objection in writing and let the firm's internal reviews sort it out. I sent the written objection within the hour. Then I drove to the cemetery for the third time that week. I needed to see the physical file, to see what was in the Plot 1147 folder now. The folder contained 3 documents. The original Garcia deed, back in the file, as if it had never been removed. The Marsh deed, still present alongside it, and a new transfer form, dated that morning, bearing my employee code and a signature that looked close enough to mine that I had to study it for a full minute before I was certain it wasn't. The pen pressure was wrong. I press hard when I write. Years of filling out carbon copy forms. This signature was light even, almost printed rather than signed. But it was my name in my code's entry field on a form that reassigned the Garcia plot to permanent occupation by Robert Alan Marsh. I photographed everything. I drove home. I opened my laptop and logged into the cemetery's database from my remote access portal. I searched for the employee code, my code, and filtered by all entries made in the last 60 days. There were 47 entries attributed to my code. I recognized about 30 of them: routine discrepancy reports, file updates, standard work. The remaining 17 were entries I had never made. They were scattered across the previous 6 weeks, always time-stamped between 2 and 4 in the morning. They were all transfer notations, not just Plot 1147. 16 other plots, spread across the cemetery in different sections: Garden of Legends, Beth Olam, the Fairbanks Lawn, the Cathedral Mausoleum, the Abbey of the Psalms. Each entry followed the same format: plot reassigned per administrative review, original purchaser notified, see file. Each one bore my code. Each one was linked to a name I didn't recognize. Names that, when I searched them in the broader database, appeared nowhere else. No purchase records, no interment logs, no family contacts, just the transfer notation, floating in the system like a bookmark in a book that had no other pages. I started writing down the plot numbers. Then I did something I probably shouldn't have. I pulled up the cemetery's digital plot map, a GIS overlay that shows every plot, its status, and its occupant. I entered the 16 plot numbers one by one. 14 of them showed as occupied, interment dates ranging from 2019 to the present, names matching the transfer notations, no ceremony records, no funeral home listed, no next of kin. 2 of them showed as reserved, purchased, prepaid, no interment yet. The names on the reservations were unfamiliar. I sat back and stared at the screen. 14 bodies, or at least 14 interment entries, in plots that had been transferred away from their original purchasers using my credentials. This wasn't a glitch. This wasn't badge cloning for the sake of after-hours building access. Someone was using the administrative system to create space for burials that had no paper trail, no ceremony, no family, and no explanation. And they were using me as the author. Friday morning, I called Detective Orozco. I told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked me to email him the list of plot numbers and the screenshots. I did, right there on the phone. He said he'd be in touch. I expected to hear back within hours, a day at most. What I got instead was silence, 4 days of it. I called his direct line twice, voicemail both times. I left messages, nothing. On Tuesday of the following week, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize, an LAPD domain, but not Orozco's. The message was brief. It informed me that the investigation into Plot 1147 had been administratively closed, and that no further action was required from civilian contractors. It thanked me for my cooperation. I called the Hollywood Division front desk and asked to speak with Detective Orozco. The officer who answered said he'd check. He came back on the line a minute later and said Orozco was on leave and couldn't be reached. He asked if someone else could help. I said no and hung up. That same afternoon, my supervisor called me. Her tone was different, careful, measured. She said the firm had received a request from the cemetery's management to reassign me to a different property. She said it wasn't disciplinary. She said it was routine. Contractors rotate between sites. She asked if I had any concerns. I had many concerns. I told her some of them. She listened, then said something that I've replayed in my head 100 times since. Daniel, the records are clean. Everything in the system is consistent. The physical files match the database. Legal reviewed it. The police closed the case. I know you feel like something is wrong, but from where I'm sitting, from where any one official is sitting, the records tell a complete, coherent story. And in that story, you processed those transfers. She wasn't threatening me. She wasn't even doubting me, not exactly. She was telling me what the system said, and the system was the only authority anyone trusted. I asked her what happened to the Garcia family. She said they'd accepted the alternative plot. The grandfather's burial had been completed the previous week in a different section. They hadn't pursued legal action. She didn't know why. That night, I did something that crossed a line. I drove to the cemetery after dark, not to the administrative building. I wasn't sure my badge would still work, and I didn't want to test it with cameras potentially watching. I went to the grounds. Hollywood Forever doesn't have overnight security at every entrance. There are sections where the perimeter wall borders residential properties, and over the years, portions of the original wrought iron fence have been replaced with chain link that isn't monitored. I knew this because I'd reviewed the ground survey maps as part of a boundary reconciliation project 2 months earlier. I entered through a gap near the Beth Olam section on the north side. I had a flashlight but kept it off. The city glow from Santa Monica Boulevard provided enough ambient light to navigate once my eyes adjusted. The paths between sections are paved and well maintained. No risk of tripping if you walk carefully. I went to the Cathedral Mausoleum first. Plot 147 was on the second level, accessible via a short interior staircase. The mausoleum is a beautiful building during the day, stained glass, marble, carefully maintained. At night, with only the emergency exit signs casting a faint green glow down the corridors, it felt like walking through the inside of a monument that had forgotten it was supposed to be for the living to visit. I found the niche. The temporary seal that the police had noted was gone, replaced with a permanent marble facing. The nameplate read, Robert Alan Marsh. Below it, in smaller letters, 1951 to 2024. No epitaph, no flowers in the built-in vase, no indication that anyone had visited or mourned. I stood there for a while, listening. The building was silent, except for the faint hum of the climate control system. I don't know what I expected to find. A feeling, maybe. Some sense that the place was wrong. But it was just a marble wall with a name on it, in a building full of marble walls with names on them. I checked 3 more plots from my list. Lawn burials, a columbarium niche, different sections, different markers. But the same story. Proper interments, professionally finished, integrated into the landscape, as if they'd been there for years, because they had been. The only thing recent was the paperwork. I left the way I'd come in, drove home, sat in my kitchen staring at my laptop until 2 in the morning, scrolling through the entries attributed to my code, looking for a pattern I could understand. The pattern I found wasn't in the plot locations or the dates. It was in the names. I searched for every name associated with the 17 unauthorized transfers: Google, social media, public records databases, obituary sites, for 14 of the 16 names, the ones the system showed as occupied. I found nothing. No obituaries, no social media profiles, no public records matching the birth years implied by the database entries. These people, as far as the internet was concerned, did not exist. They had never existed. They were names on marble and names in a database, and nothing else. For 2 of the names, the reserved plots not yet occupied, I found something. They were alive. They were real people living in Los Angeles. One was a retired electrician in Van Nuys. The other was a woman who worked at a dry cleaner in Koreatown. Neither of them had any apparent connection to Hollywood Forever Cemetery. Neither of them had, as far as I could tell from public records, purchased a burial plot anywhere. But the system said they had. The system said they'd prepaid for plots in Hollywood Forever, and that I had processed the reservation. I almost contacted them. I had the electrician's address. I could have driven to Van Nuys, knocked on his door, asked if he knew his name was on a burial plot he hadn't purchased. But something stopped me, not fear exactly, but a calculation. If I was wrong about all of this, if there was some explanation I was missing, then I'd be a stranger showing up at a retiree's home talking about graves. And if I was right, then whoever was doing this had already put my name on 17 documents I hadn't signed, put my code on entries I hadn't made, and logged my badge at times I hadn't been present. They could put my name on other things too. The reassignment to a different property went into effect the following Monday. My new site was a small memorial park in Glendale, quiet, modern, almost entirely digital records. Easy work. Boring work. I was relieved, in a way. The distance felt like safety. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. I filed my reports. I reconciled my discrepancies. I didn't log into the Hollywood Forever system. My access had been revoked as part of the transfer, which was standard. I slept through most nights. Normal life resumed its shape around the absence of answers. Then I got a letter. Not an email, a physical letter, in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it was printed a plot number, 2291, and below it, a date. The date was 3 weeks in the future. I didn't recognize the plot number. It wasn't one of the 17 I'd flagged. I didn't know which section it was in. I no longer had access to check. I called my supervisor and asked, hypothetically, if she could look up a plot number at Hollywood Forever for me. She asked why. I said it was related to my documentation of the previous situation. I just wanted to verify something from my own records. She said she'd check when she had a moment. She called back the next day. Her voice was strange, not alarmed, but confused. She said, Plot 2291 was in the Garden of Memories section. It was currently listed as reserved, prepaid. The name on the reservation was Daniel Brewer. I didn't say anything for a long time. She asked if I was still there. I said yes. She asked if I'd purchased a burial plot at Hollywood Forever. I said no. She asked if I wanted her to report it. I said yes. Then I said wait. Then I said I'd call her back. I never called her back about that. Instead, I drove to the LAPD Hollywood Division Station. I asked to speak with anyone handling cases related to Hollywood Forever Cemetery. The desk officer made some calls. After 20 minutes, a detective I'd never met came out. Not Orozco. He introduced himself as Walsh. He said he could help. I told him everything. The unauthorized entries. The badge logs, the transfer forms, the names that didn't exist, the reserved plots for living people, the letter in my mailbox, the plot reserved in my name. He took notes. He asked clarifying questions. He was professional throughout. When I finished, he said he'd look into it and asked for my contact information. Then, as I was standing to leave, he said, "Mr. Brewer, one more thing. You mentioned a Detective Orozco who was handling the initial investigation. I just want to clarify. We don't have a Detective Orozco assigned to this division. We haven't had anyone by that name here in the 3 years I've been at this station." I described him. Walsh shook his head. He said it was possible I'd dealt with someone from a different division who'd been temporarily assigned, but he'd check. He showed me to the door. I sat in my car in the station parking lot for a long time. The conversation with Orozco had been real. I had his phone number in my call log. I pulled it up and dialed it. A recording played, the standard message for a disconnected line. The email from the LAPD domain informing me the case was closed. I still had that too. I checked it on my phone. The sender's address was a string of letters and numbers at a domain that looked official. But when I examined it more carefully, character by character, the domain wasn't lapd.gov. It was lapd-gov.org. A different address, a different domain entirely. Someone had sent me an email designed to look like it came from the police, telling me the investigation was closed. Someone had impersonated a detective, taken my initial report, my list of plot numbers, my screenshots, and then vanished. The investigation, as far as the real LAPD was concerned, hadn't existed until I walked into the station that day. This realization should have terrified me. In a way, it did. But the dominant feeling was something else, a cold, rational clarity that came from understanding the scope of what was happening. This wasn't a data entry error. This wasn't someone cloning my badge. This was a system, an operation that had multiple components: access to the cemetery's physical and digital records, the ability to perform professional interments, the ability to forge documents, the ability to impersonate law enforcement, and the willingness to use my identity as cover for all of it. And now, according to the system, there was a burial plot waiting for me. I went home. I locked my door. I pulled the letter out again and looked at the date. 20 days away. I took photos of it. I put it in a plastic bag. Over the next week, I tried to approach the situation the way I'd approach any records discrepancy, methodically documenting everything. I obtained a copy of my credit report to check for identity theft. Clean. I ran my name through public records databases. Nothing abnormal. I checked with the DMV, my bank, my health insurance. Everything was in order. Whoever was using my name was doing so only within the cemetery system, a closed system that most of the outside world would never interface with unless they were burying someone. I also did something that, in retrospect, might have been a mistake. I drove to Van Nuys and parked across the street from the address I'd found for the retired electrician, one of the 2 living people whose names were on reserved plots. I didn't approach. I just watched for a while. Normal house, normal street. A man who matched the age came out around 10 in the morning, walked to his mailbox, collected his mail, and went back inside. He was alive. He was fine. And somewhere in the Hollywood Forever database, a plot was reserved in his name. Prepaid. Waiting. 12 days before the date on the letter, I made a decision. I was going to go back to Hollywood Forever at night and find plot 291. I was going to see what was there. If it was empty ground, just grass over an unused grave space, then maybe the reservation was just another data entry, another line in a system full of impossible lines. But if it wasn't empty, if something was already prepared, then I'd have physical evidence that something criminal was happening, and I'd bring it to Walsh. I went on a Thursday night, same method as before. North side, gap in the fence near Beth Olam. But this time, I brought more than a flashlight. I brought my phone set to record video, a small pry bar in case I encountered a locked gate within the grounds, and a printed copy of the cemetery's section map with Plot 2-291 marked. The Garden of Memories is on the east side of the property, near the lake. It's one of the older sections. Flat lawn markers, mature trees, a few family monuments. At night, the lake reflects the ambient city glow, giving the area a faint, sourceless illumination. I could make out the paths and the section markers without my flashlight. The water was flat, black, and the reflection didn't move, like the lake was holding its breath. I found row 22 and counted markers until I reached the approximate location of plot 2291. The grass was even, undisturbed. No marker, no sign of recent excavation. Just flat ground, the same as the empty plots on either side of it. I stood on it, solid, normal. For a moment, I felt foolish. Standing in a cemetery at 1 a.m, in the dark, on an empty plot of grass because a letter with no return address had a number on it. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe Walsh would investigate and find that Orozco was a detective from another division who'd been reassigned. Maybe the fake email was a prank. Maybe the system entries were a former employee's doing, and my credentials had been compromised months ago through some mundane security failure. Then my phone buzzed, a notification from the cemetery system, which I should not have been receiving because my access had been revoked. But there it was, an automated alert, the kind that fires when a record is updated. Plot 2291, status change, reserved scheduled, interment date confirmed. The date matched the one on the letter. I looked down at the ground beneath my feet. In 20 days, no, 12 now, someone was going to be buried exactly where I was standing, and the reservation was in my name. I left quickly, not running, moving with purpose, but controlled, back along the path, past the lake, through Beth Olam, through the fence gap. I drove home well over the speed limit. At home, I screenshotted the notification before it could disappear. I emailed it to myself, to my supervisor, and to Walsh's card email. Then I wrote a detailed timeline of everything that had happened, every date, every anomaly, every conversation, and emailed that to Walsh as well, CCing my own attorney. I didn't have an attorney until that night. I hired one through an online legal service at 2 a.m. Walsh replied the next morning. He said he'd received my materials and was opening an official report. He asked me not to enter the cemetery grounds again. He said he'd be in contact. 5 days passed. Then Walsh called. He said his team had conducted a site visit to Hollywood Forever with a warrant. They'd examined plot 2291. They'd also examined 3 of the 14 plots I'd flagged as containing unauthorized interments. He said the ground at plot 2291 showed no signs of preparation for burial. The turf was undisturbed. No vault had been preset. No excavation had been scheduled through the ground's crew. The cemetery's management was cooperative and confused. They had no record of a scheduled interment at that plot. The database entry I'd flagged, the one showing the status change, was no longer in the system. Walsh said he checked the database himself. Plot 2291 was listed as reserved, purchaser name blank, no scheduled activity. I told him I had the screenshot. He said he'd seen my email. He said the screenshot showed a notification, but notifications can be spoofed. Without the corresponding database entry, I asked about the other plots, the 14 occupied ones. He paused, then said, "We opened 3 of them with the cemetery's cooperation. Court order." Another pause. "They were occupied, Mr. Brewer. 3 caskets, 3 bodies, all properly interred. Professional work. The cemetery had no records of who performed the interments, no crew assignments, no work orders, but the physical work was legitimate. Sealed vaults, regulation caskets, proper depth." I asked if they'd identified the bodies. "That's where it gets complicated," Walsh said. "The medical examiner's office processed them. We don't have final reports yet, but preliminary examination suggests these aren't recent. The condition of the remains, the state of the casket interiors, these interments appear to have been in place for years, possibly decades. The ME mentioned coffin hardware that hasn't been manufactured since the 1980s. I reminded him that the database entries were all dated within the last 2 years. "I know," he said. "That's the complication." He said the investigation was ongoing. He asked me to remain available. He said, very specifically, that I should not return to the cemetery grounds for any reason, and that if I received any further communications, letters, emails, phone calls, I should forward them to him immediately and not respond. The date on the letter came and went. Nothing happened, not that I could perceive. No news reports, no calls from Walsh. I checked the obituaries obsessively for a week afterward, looking for my own name. Nothing. 3 weeks later, I received my final communication related to the case. It wasn't a letter this time. It was a package, small, padded envelope, no return address, delivered by USPS. Inside was a brass plate, a burial marker plate, the kind that gets set into the frame of a mausoleum niche or affixed to a flat lawn marker. It was engraved, my name, my birth year, and a death year, 2025. Below the dates was a plot number, not 2291, a different number, 3015. I called Walsh. His number went to voicemail. I left a message. I called again an hour later. Voicemail. I called the station and asked for him. The desk officer checked and came back. "Detective Walsh is currently on leave." I haven't heard from Walsh since. That was 4 months ago. I no longer work as a records compliance contractor. I resigned from the firm 2 weeks after receiving the brass plate. My supervisor accepted my resignation without comment. I took a job at a hardware store in Pasadena. Something simple, something with no databases and no record systems and no after-hours access to anything. The brass plate is in a safe deposit box at my bank, along with printed copies of every screenshot, every email, and the timeline I wrote. My attorney has duplicates of everything. He says there's nothing actionable. No one has directly threatened me. No one has committed a crime against me that can be proven, and the LAPD investigation, if it's still ongoing, hasn't produced any charges or public findings. I checked the Hollywood Forever database one final time before my access was fully terminated. I found plot 3015. It's in the Abbey of the Psalms. It's listed as reserved, prepaid. The purchaser name is mine. The reservation date is the same day I was originally hired by my firm, 9 months before I received the letter, 9 months before any of this started. According to the system, I purchased my own burial plot on my first day of work. I've been preparing for this since the beginning. The thing that keeps me awake isn't the fear of death. It's not the question of who is doing this, or even why. It's the realization that the system, whatever it is, whoever runs it, doesn't need me to cooperate. It doesn't need my consent, my participation. or my awareness. It operates with my name, my code, my credentials, and it performs its functions with a professionalism and thoroughness that makes everything it does look legitimate. It doesn't matter that I didn't sign the forms exist. It doesn't matter that I wasn't there at 2 a.m. The badge logs say I was. It doesn't matter that I didn't buy a burial plot. The record says I did. In the world of records and systems and official documentation, I have already done everything necessary to be buried. The only thing missing is the body. Some nights, when I can't sleep, I drive past Hollywood Forever on Santa Monica Boulevard. The walls are high. The gates are locked after hours. The grounds are dark except for the faint glow of pathway lights along the interior roads. Everything looks peaceful, maintained, correct. And somewhere in there, under a brass plate that already has my name on it, the system is waiting for the only discrepancy it hasn't yet reconciled. But the system, I've learned, does not wait patiently. It prepares. 6 weeks ago, almost 5 months after the brass plate arrived, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But something about the area code made me pick up. 323. Hollywood. The voice on the other end was professional, female, and unfamiliar. She said she was calling from Greenlawn Memorial Services, the same funeral home listed on the Robert Alan Marsh interment records. She asked if I was Daniel Brewer. I said yes. She said she was calling to confirm arrangements for a prepaid burial package associated with Plot 3015. She asked if I preferred a morning or afternoon service. She asked if I had selected a casket yet. She spoke as if I had initiated this conversation, as if I had called her. I told her there must be a mistake. She paused, then read back the name on the file, Daniel Brewer. She read the date of birth, mine. She read the plot number, 3015. She read the purchase date, the day I was hired. Then she said very politely, "Sir, I'm looking at your signature on the pre-need agreement. Would you like me to email you a copy?" I gave her my email address. The document arrived within the hour. It was a standard California pre-need funeral contract, 6 pages long, filled out in my name. The signature on the final page was not mine, but it was close. Closer than the transfer form signature had been. Whoever was forging my name had been practicing. The contract was dated the same day as my hire. It listed a credit card number for payment, a number I did not recognize. When I called the bank that issued the card, they told me the account had been opened in my name 6 months before I started the job. The address on the account was a UPS store box in Burbank. The account had a 0 balance. It had been used exactly once, to pay Greenlawn Memorial Services $4,800 for Plot 3015. I drove to Burbank. The UPS store was still there. The box number was still active, rented annually, paid in cash, renewed automatically. The store manager would not tell me who rented it. I showed him my driver's license and explained that the box was registered under my name. He said he had no way to verify that without a court order. I asked if anyone had picked up mail recently. He said he couldn't disclose that information. I waited in my car across the street for 3 hours. No one came. That night, I did something I had sworn I wouldn't do. I went back to Hollywood Forever. Not to the grounds. I stayed on Santa Monica Boulevard, parked legally at the curb. I sat in my car and watched the cemetery gates. The moon was almost full. The sky was clear. I could see the tops of the mausoleum buildings above the wall. At around 11:30, a car pulled into the cemetery's main entrance. The gate opened automatically. Someone had a remote or a code. The car was a dark sedan, common model, no distinguishing features. It drove down the main road toward the interior. I couldn't follow without my badge. I sat and watched. 20 minutes later, the car came back out. It paused at the gate, then turned left onto Santa Monica Boulevard and disappeared into traffic. I didn't get the license plate. I didn't have a camera ready. I just sat there, clutching my steering wheel, realizing that someone had been inside the cemetery while I watched from the outside. Someone with access. Someone with a car that didn't stand out. Someone who knew exactly when to come and go. The next morning, I emailed Walsh again. His email address bounced back. Account no longer active. I called the Hollywood division and asked for him. The desk officer put me on hold, then came back. No detective by that name is currently assigned here. I described Walsh. The officer said, "Sir, we've had a few detectives rotate through in the last year. I can't confirm anyone by that description without more information." I filed a public records request for the department's personnel roster covering the previous 18 months. It arrived last week, 12 pages of names. Orozco was not on it. Walsh was not on it. There is no Detective Orozco. There is no Detective Walsh. There never were. The people I spoke to, the investigations I believed were ongoing. They were as fabricated as the transfer forms, as the deed of sale for Robert Alan Marsh, as the prepaid burial contract in my name. I don't know who answered the phone at the Hollywood division when I called. I don't know who sat behind the desk and told me Walsh was on leave. I don't know if the station I walked into was even the real LAPD Hollywood division. The building was right, the badges looked right, but I've spent enough time around record systems to know that a convincing facade is not the same as the thing itself. Last Monday, I received one final document. It arrived in a manila envelope, no return address, postmarked from Los Angeles. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a burial permit, the kind issued by the county coroner's office, authorizing the interment of a deceased person. The deceased's name was Daniel Brewer. The cause of death was listed as natural causes. The attending physician's signature was a name I didn't recognize. The permit was dated for the same day as the death year on the brass plate, 2025. But the date, the specific calendar date, was exactly 6 months from today. Someone has already scheduled my death. Someone has already obtained a burial permit for a body that does not exist. Someone has already opened a credit account in my name, paid for my plot, forged my signature on a pre-need contract, and impersonated law enforcement to close an investigation that would have exposed it all. I have taken every document to my attorney. He has reviewed everything. He says the burial permit is a forgery. The county has no record of it. He says the credit account was opened with a stolen identity that matches my information but doesn't originate from any breach he can trace. He says I have not been charged with a crime. No one has physically threatened me, and the police have no record of any investigation matching my description. He says essentially that I have a collection of very disturbing paper, but no standing to do anything with it. He asked me if I wanted to change my name. I said no. He asked me why. I told him, because the system doesn't care what my name is. It will find me. It already has my birth date, my social security number, my employment history, my signature. Changing my name would be like changing the label on a file folder while the contents remain inside. The system doesn't read labels. It reads contents. So I still live in the same apartment. I still work at the hardware store. I still drive past Hollywood Forever at night, sometimes when I can't sleep. And I still check my mailbox every day, not with fear anymore, but with a kind of morbid curiosity. I want to know what comes next. I want to see how deep the records go. Last week, I found something new. A postcard, glossy, like a real estate advertisement. On the front was a photograph of the Abbey of the Psalms at Hollywood Forever, the building where Plot 3015 is located. On the back, typed in a sans serif font, was a single sentence. Your niche is ready for final reconciliation. No signature, no return address, just a postmark from Los Angeles and a date stamp that matched the burial permit's date, 6 months from today. I put it in the safe deposit box with the brass plate, then I went back to work. I helped a customer find the right size of sandpaper. I rang up a purchase of pipe fittings. I drove home, ate dinner, and went to bed. But I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and thought about the phrase, final reconciliation. That's not a standard cemetery term. I've never seen it in any interment log or deed book, but I know what it means in records compliance. Reconciliation is the process of making two conflicting records agree. You take the paper version and the digital version, or the survey map and the deed book, and you resolve the discrepancy. You make them match. You make them consistent. The system has two versions of me. There's the living Daniel Brewer, the one who works at a hardware store, who has a dentist appointment next month, who is writing this account. And there's the Daniel Brewer in the system, the one who bought a burial plot on his first day of work, who has a signed pre-need contract, who has a death certificate and a burial permit, and a niche waiting for him in the Abbey of the Psalms. The system is trying to reconcile those two records, and reconciliation only ends one way. I don't know who or what is doing this. I don't know if it's a person, a group, or something else entirely. I don't know if the bodies in those 14 plots were ever alive in any way that matches our understanding of the word. I don't know if Robert Alan Marsh existed, or if his name was as fabricated as his interment records. But I know this. The system is patient. It doesn't need me to die. It only needs the records to match. And eventually, they always do. If you're reading this and you work in records, any kind of records, anywhere, I want you to check your own employee file. Look at the dates, look at the signatures, look for any entry that doesn't quite match your memory, because the system doesn't just run itself, it runs through us, and once it has your credentials, it doesn't let go. My name is Daniel Brewer. According to the state of California, I am alive. According to the Hollywood Forever Cemetery database, I am prepaid and awaiting. According to my own records, I am writing this at my kitchen table at 11:30 at night, and my hands are steady. But the system doesn't read my records. It reads its own. And in its records, I have been dead for a very long time. The only thing left is to make the paperwork agree.